Niccolo Machiavelli was a Florentine philosopher and political theorist who is famous for writing The Prince. The Prince is a book which contains many valuable insights about power and successful governance, and since the time of its writing, one of its most famous lessons is that it is better for a ruler to be feared by his subjects than to be loved. As part of my series on famous political and philosophical concepts, this video shall examine why Niccolo Machiavelli believed this to be the case. The idea that it is better to be feared than to be loved can be found in chapter 17 of The Prince. Machiavelli says that ideally, a ruler should want to be both loved and feared, but if it is only possible to be one, then the ruler should strive to be feared over being loved. To quote Machiavelli, "From this arises the question of whether it is better to be loved more than feared, or feared more than loved. The reply is that one ought to be both feared and loved, but as it is difficult for the two to go together, it is much safer to be feared than loved, if one of the two has to be wanting." Machiavelli's rationale for this belief is rooted in the fact that men are self-centered, and should it benefit a person to disobey his ruler, that man is more likely to disobey a ruler who is loved than one who is feared. Again, to quote Machiavelli, "And men have less scruple in offending one who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared. For love is held by a chain of obligation, which, men being selfish, is broken whenever it serves their purpose, but fear is maintained by a dread of punishment, which never fails." Machiavelli also goes on to say that a man can choose what he loves, but cannot choose what he fears. A ruler can court the love of his people with honorable behavior and low taxes, but it is ultimately not within the ruler's control as to whether or not his people love him. On the contrary, being feared is within a ruler's control. If he wishes, the ruler can make examples out of those who disobey him, and his subjects will react accordingly. To Machiavelli, a wise ruler is one who leaves nothing to chance and acquires as much control over situations as possible. Recognizing this, it is not hard to see why he concludes that it is better to be feared than to be loved. Having now come to understand the rationale behind Machiavelli's advice, it is necessary to clarify one common misconception that people have, namely, that Machiavelli is instructing rulers to be cruel tyrants who rely on terror. This is incorrect. Throughout the chapter, Machiavelli stresses that while it is advantageous to be feared, a ruler should avoid becoming hated if he wishes to maintain power. But how does a ruler accomplish this? According to Machiavelli, 3 actions on the part of the ruler are necessary to avoid earning the hatred of his subjects. These are: 1. Abstain from interfering with the property of his people. 2. Abstain from interfering with the women of his people. And 3. When violence or cruelty is called for, do these things decisively in one fell swoop, and do not continuously employ cruelty over a long period of time. Machiavelli mentions this in chapter 17 and reiterates this advice throughout the book. In chapter 19, he writes, "He will chiefly become hated, as I said, by being capricious and usurping the property and women of his subjects, which he must abstain from doing. And whenever one does not attack the property or honor of the generality of men, they will be contented, and one will only have to combat the ambition of the few, who can easily be held in check in many ways." As for Machiavelli's third piece of advice, that being that cruelty is best employed in one fell swoop and not continuously, this point was elaborated on in detail within chapter 8, where Machiavelli writes, "Well used may be called those, if it is possible to use the word well of evil, which are committed once for the need of securing oneself, and which afterwards are not persisted in, but are exchanged for maneuvers as useful to the subjects as possible. Cruelties ill used are those which, although few at first, increase rather than diminish with time." This concludes our analysis of Machiavelli's statement that it is better for a ruler to be feared than to be loved. For more analysis on The Prince, I refer viewers to my book report on it, which I will put on the screen as an end card. Next week we shall examine Carl Schmitt's famous idea of the friend-enemy distinction. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video, which is likely to round up the current year of 2024.